brothers, our collaborators, friends, and esteemed resource persons, a very hearty welcome to you all to this meeting organized by the Secretariat for Justice and Peace and Integrity of Creation, the GSJP IC office of the National Council of the Montfort Brothers of St. Gabriel in India, and the Asia Pacific Secretariat of the GSJP IC. This meeting is hosted by the Montfort Social Institute based at Hyderabad. Simon Raj is my co-host. This conference is deliberately titled Being Prophets and Proclaimers of the Good News in a Post-Pandemic World, Challenges and Opportunities before the Montfort Brothers. And this is to indicate our vocation as religious brothers and our collaborators in our mission to the world as communicators of the good news of justice, peace, and integrity of creation in these times of global suffering, global pandemic. This is a unique meeting, really, necessitated by the pandemic. This meeting was meant to be physical, hosted at Montfort Social Institute on these very days with delegates and leaders from the provinces in Asia and East Africa. But that was not to be. As St. Paul puts it, God works everything unto good. Just imagine what a difference there has been moving from a physical meeting as we had planned it to a virtual meeting. Our horizons have expanded manifold and unimagined possibilities have unfolded before us. We have brothers and collaborators who are together here at this meeting from all over the world, but mostly from the Anglophone countries of Asia and East Africa, also from Europe, from other parts of the world. We have participants here. This would not have been possible if this was a physical meeting. We have the whole central administration of the congregation present with us. So also the leadership of the Asia Pacific and East African provinces. We have resource persons drawn from almost every continent, some of them having to lose their sleep. I just saw Rob Robinson from New York, and for him it is 3:30 a.m. in the morning. We shall begin this conference with an invocation. Invocation in Hindi, inviting the Trinitarian God to be present with us. I request Sisters Genestus and Nirmala from the Montfort Social Institute team to lead us in this invocation. Sister Genestus.
Hey mere Ishvara, hey mere Swami, aaja dil mein mere fardo jyoti. Pita sharanam, putra sharanam, atma sharanam, sharanam sharanam. Hey mere Ishvara, hey mere Swami, aaja dil mein mere fardo shanti. Pita sharanam, putra sharanam, atma sharanam, sharanam sharanam. Hey mere Ishvara, हे मेरे स्वामी, आजा दिल में मेरे फर्दो मुक्ति. पिता शरणम, पुत्र शरणम, आत्मा शरणम, शरणम शरणम, शरणम शरणम, शरणम शरणम.
Thank you, Sister Genestus, Sister Nirmala, for bringing us into the stillness of God's presence. It's my privilege to invite Brother T.K. James, the Assistant General, to welcome the gathering and explain the context of this meeting. Brother James TK is a member of the general team holding the portfolio of the Gabriel Secretariat for Justice, Peace and Integrity of Creation. Brother James is a former provincial superior of the Ranchi province and an educator by training and profession. He will welcome us and set the context and tone of this meeting. Brother James.
Greetings to all of you from our General House, Rome. Dear Reverend Brother Superior General, esteemed resource persons, dear brothers from across the globe, esteemed collaborators, associates, and well-wishers. Addressing the delegates of the 32nd General Chapter of the Montfort Brothers of St. Gabriel, Pope Francis said on 27th April 2018, at the center of your mission, there has always been attention to the poor and the marginalized. Continue to help them to shape their future so that they can take their rightful place in society. It is the bound duty of the present generation of brothers to keep alive the Montfortian charism of caring for the less fortunate brothers and sisters. The objective of this Anglophone conference is to reconfirm our commitment to the marginalized and to read the signs of the time. The present time is marked by the unabated spread of pandemic. We need to identify our challenges and opportunities as prophets and proclaimers of good news. In order to do so, the first 2 days, that is today and tomorrow, we shall listen to the eminent resource persons and interact with them. On the final day, that is on 11th November, we shall assess the current situation of the pandemic and try to arrive at some strategic and operational plans. This conference is a continuation of the similar conferences held at Nairobi in 1999, at Hyderabad in 2005, at Bangalore in 2008, and in Brazzaville in 2015. These conferences and the recent general chapters, particularly the 29th general chapter, were the congregational efforts to integrate the justice, peace, and integrity of creation in the life and mission of the Institute. I hope and pray that this initiative may help every province, community, and institution to reflect the gospel values more powerfully. I am immensely happy to welcome all the brothers, associates, collaborators, and our well-wishers to this conference. A special welcome to the esteemed resource persons of today, namely Brother John Calorical, our Superior General, Father Cedric Prakash S.J., Mr. Mike Davis, Miss Reina Braganza, and Mr. Rob Robinson. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother James, for that brief, succinct, and to the point context setting that you have done, and the welcome that you have accorded. It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome Brother John Calorical, the Superior General of the Montfort Brothers of St. Gabriel, to give his inaugural address. A distinguished educator, Brother John is the first from Asia to be elected to the mission of leadership at the highest level in the 300 and more years, the history of the congregation. He is at the moment serving his second term as the international president. Over to you, Brother John.
So, greetings to you all once again from Rome on behalf of all the members of the Central Administration. It is certainly a joy for me to join you all this morning, which is afternoon for most of you, and be a part of this first online GSJP conference jointly organized by GSJP Asia Pacific Secretariat and the JP Commission of the National Council of the Brothers in India. Well, I had expressed some doubts to Brother James and Brother Verghese about my presence today due to the surgical intervention I had a couple of weeks back. But I'm happy that by God's grace, I'm able to be present for this significant event in the congregation where almost the whole leadership of the central administration and the 10 different Anglophone entities in Asia and East Africa are present. Before I think of a message, let me at the very outset place on record my sincere appreciation to the organizers of this mega event, in particular Brother James T.K., the Assistant General in charge of the JPIC dossier, Brother Irudayam, the National Convener of the JP Commission, and Brother Verghese, the Executive Secretary of GSJP Asia Pacific Secretariat. It's indeed very heartening to see such a goodly number of participants, which to me is a proof of your commitment to the cause of justice, peace, and the integrity of creation. Let me also take this opportunity to say a special word of thanks to all the resource persons who are coming from the different corners of the world in order to share their experience and expertise in their respective fields for the benefit of the Montfort brothers and Gabriel and their valued collaborators in mission in particular. Thank you, Brother Verghese, for your kind words of introduction. Thank you, Brother James, for your warm words of welcome and for putting this conference in right perspective. I'm particularly happy with the theme chosen, prophets and proclaimers of the good news in a post-pandemic world, challenges and opportunities for religious brothers. It is a timely reminder of the clarion call given by our rule of life and constitutions. I quote from Article 14, your total oblation to God demands a dedicated, dynamic love for all men and women. Mindful of the poorer ones among them, you will play your part in humanity's struggle for progress, more particularly through educational activities. All our last 4 general chapters, beginning with the 29th general chapter held in 2000, have been giving a new thrust to the justice and peace dimension of our mission as religious brothers. The setting up of new structures like the GSJP Secretariat in 2000, the Montfort Social Institute in 2010, and the GSJP Asia Pacific Secretariat in 2016 all stand as glowing tribute to the continued commitment of the Montfort Brothers and Gabriel for the promotion of truth, love, justice, and peace. In fact, I never get tired of reminding the brothers that as consecrated persons, our primary mission is to participate in the triple common mission of the Church, namely evangelization, witnessing, and human promotion according to the charism of each institute. From the beginning of human history, as revealed in the salvation history, God is committed to advance his plan in order that the world will have life in abundance. We are all very familiar with the mission statement of Jesus himself, which you find in John 10:10, I have come that you may have life and have it in full measure. An indisputable fact that today strong links exist between evangelization and human promotion. Today, consecrated life requires us to make some unavoidable options in drawing up programs during the initial and ongoing formation periods, an incarnate spirituality, insertion in the reality of the poorest, dialogue and reconciliation as a way towards peace and integrity of creation. This certainly will pose big challenges like passing from an academic theoretical formation to an experimental formation, changing from stereotyped formation to an inculturated formation of living and experiencing, assimilating attitudes into one's life that promote changes in relation to God, one's brothers and sisters, and creation, living the experience of sonship, fraternity, solidarity, and commitment. It entails a commitment which requires a gradual and systematic assimilation of the social doctrines of the Church in order to discern God's call in the challenges of the social reality and in the responses which need to be given, thereby promoting the values of justice, peace, and integrity of creation. The Catholic Church is undoubtedly the oldest, the biggest, and in many ways the most experienced corporation ever in the world. And yet, just like all corporations, COVID-19 pandemic has certainly put all institutions in the Church on the spot. The world is changing so rapidly that initiatives and solutions that were fresh only a few weeks ago now ring stale in the minds of the leaders, searching for ideas to keep pace in the changing context. One of the questions that many of us are wrestling with in these days is how to seize this present crisis and make an opportunity of grace and for our faith in Christ to shine forth. They feel that now is the chance for the church institutions to nimbly seize the opportunity to implement lessons learned from the best business practices of successful corporations so as to continue to carry out the church's specific pastoral mission in this time of crisis. What does it mean in these new situations to love our neighbor as the Bible teaches us? We will need to practice the virtues of generosity, open-heartedness, and caring for the weak and vulnerable. This means that we will need to be attentive to those who are isolated, scared, and are at risk. The new encyclical Fratelli Tuti of Pope Francis has come as a timely intervention for us to draw inspiration from in order to find some solutions to the problems facing us today. How to be prophets and proclaimers of the good news in a post-pandemic world. Though the encyclical was initially intended to focus on the fraternal relationships between religions exemplified in the common statement Pope Francis signed in Abu Dhabi with Grand Imam Ahmad Al-Tayeb. As the encyclical developed, Pope Francis expanded its scope to reflect on the COVID-19 crisis and on the dangers and opportunities created by the need to respond to it. The encyclical begins by examining the signs of a lack of fraternity in society that contribute to a closed world. This list is long and comprehensive, including the erosion of human rights, the dominance of ideologies of economic self-interest over the common good, the treatment of refugees, and many forms of discrimination. At the heart of the rich, complex, and extensive reflection that Pope Francis offers us in Fratelli Tuti, we find the parable of the Good Samaritan. It proposes compassion and becoming a neighbor has the sensitivity and the way of acting that makes it possible to heal those wounded in each person, that each person carries, not to cling to the role that urges us to pass by wounded people, to renounce all violence that hurts or kills the fraternity, and to take responsibility for one another. We accept this invitation when we open ourselves up to the possibility of sharing the same of a better world in which the dignity of all is recognized, in which the relationships of solidarity are generated to the search for the common good. Universal brotherhood is possible only when we live in peace. Pope Francis insists on the urgency of opening paths of peace and above all of finding artisans of peace. Peace requires justice that is achieved from the recognition of truth. The path of peace is illuminated by the truth with the reach of all people. Peace implies overcoming poverty and its causes, that is, the cessation of exclusion and the incorporation of all into social, economic, and political life. I'm sure that the resource persons of these 2 days will throw more light on these aspects from their different contexts to help us arrive at some concrete ways of using these challenges as opportunities. For us, the Montfort brothers of St. Gabriel, who are engaged in the educational mission at different levels, COVID-19 days have given us an opportunity to reflect more deeply on the meaning of life and the priorities we have set for ourselves. Looking at our future with confidence and hope, we must reflect on the objectives and strategies of education we need to impart to children in our care. Our 32nd General Chapter reminded us that our Montfortian education mission should possess the prophetic edge necessary to embrace the marginalized, critique the dehumanizing elements of dominant cultures, counter gender discrimination, and offer alternate paradigms. If our 32nd General Chapter cautioned us about the possibilities of information and communication technology and social media tools becoming realities of our times, we see that COVID-19 has forced our schools to shift education from physical classrooms to online classrooms with all the challenges and opportunities it offers. We have to accept the fact that the use of technology in teaching will be inevitable, and soon this will lead to a new era where the best of faculty, who are well-versed both in their subjects as well as in the use of technology, will be available from across the globe to the students. Are we prepared for this sea change in the educational scenario and use these challenges as opportunities? Before I conclude, let me, on behalf of the Central Administration, renew my sincere thanks to the organizers of this webinar, to all the resource persons, and to you, all the participants. I pray and hope that these 3 days will help each one of us at the personal level to realize one of the exhortations of our message of the 30th General Chapter, which reads, I quote, "Let us be bold and courageous in facing today's challenges." Thank you. Wish you all a wonderful day. God bless.
Thank you very much, Brother John, Superior General. You have recalled to us the fundamentals of our calling. You have recounted the challenges that we face in our context, especially in the context of the pandemic. and you have told us about possible responses, particularly taking on Pope Francis' encyclical Fratelli Tuti. We are all brothers and sisters. That can give us the guidelines of the future that we can take on. Thank you very much, and your support, your prayers, your solidarity and your fraternity has been of immense importance to each of our works in the context of justice, peace, and integrity of creation. Thank you very much, Brother John, and thanks to the whole general team that is present here to participate in this conference. Now, today is the first day of the conference. We shall have this conference going on for the next 3 days, today, tomorrow, and the day after. Today is meant to be context setting, understanding the most important issues that the world faces in these times of the pandemic, so that we are able to respond creatively, adequately, and in a sustainable manner. We have speakers lined up for the next 2 days, today and tomorrow. We have selected these speakers for their academic excellence, yes, on the one hand, but even more as people who have spent years of their lives, many years of their lives on the margins, on the periphery, enabling people, organizing people, empowering people, struggling along with them, so that those whom the world rejects should be your first choice, as Montfort would say, has been actually realized through these speakers who will speak to us today. The first speaker that I am calling on is Cedric Prakash. Cedric Prakash is a Jesuit of the Gujarat province. He will be talking to us on the situation of human rights in the countries in Asia. We have here brothers present from India, of course. We have also brothers and collaborators present from Sri Lanka, from Singapore, from Malaysia, from Thailand, from Philippines, from the South Pacific Islands. And what is the situation of human rights in this continent that is the largest continent that harbors a vast majority of the world's population? Father Cedric has been a recipient of the Rafi Muhammad Award, the Kabir Puraskar Award, and the Chevalier of the Legion of Honor of the French government for his work to protect human rights and promote interreligious harmony. Father Cedric.
Thank you, Brother Varghese. It's good to be here. I want to thank each one of you, both for the privilege and the opportunity that you give me to be with you at this great assembly on the theme, Prophets and Proclaimers of the Good News in a Post-Pandemic World, Challenge and Opportunities for Religious Brothers. I want to thank your Superior General, Brother John, for his very insightful and erudite keynote address. The welcome from your Assistant Superior General, Brother T.K. James, Brother Rudayam, and to you, Brother Varghese, for being the chief organizers of this program today, tomorrow, and the day after. When we speak about prophets and proclaimers, we are talking about both word and witness. It was definitely the charism of St. Louis de Montfort and the charism of the Gabriel brothers today. I've had great experience with the Gabriel brothers. I go about all over the world saying that if there is one religious congregation of men in the world known for their availability and hospitality, it has to be the Gabriel brothers. Top on. I've spent some days there at the Assumption University in Bangkok. Brother Munipidikail was in charge at that time many years ago, of great memory. His brother was my novice master here in Gujarat, Father Anthony Munipidikail. And the hospitality that the brothers radiated later on in Madras, in Chennai, and so on, and everywhere. And the great work you are doing, whether from the Montfort Social Institute and from elsewhere. So the theme itself is challenging. My question throughout, ever since I was invited to be here with you all this afternoon, this morning, this night, as in New York just now, I was wondering, what do I tell you when each of you, your congregation, and from your past general congregations, have radiated this theme in so many different ways? I went back to your website and your Gabriel, both Secretariat for Justice and Peace and Integrity of Creation, has this words very clearly spelled out on your website in that section. Go to those who are lowly, marginalized, or rejected. Try to understand them and be close to them. Let your attitude reveal to them the love of Christ and his church, and bear them. Make known to them the good news of the hope that is Christ. This is a setting. This is the context. But for me, I've been given in the space of these 15 and 20 minutes, now much less, to speak about the human rights situation in Asia. I think just speaking about just one human right, or speaking of each of the countries you have been involved with in India, in Sri Lanka, Singapore, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Philippines, would definitely need maybe 3 days each, not merely to try to sum. But I'm trying to do my best just to highlight a few points and stick, as Brother Varghese has just reminded us, to the time frame given to me and to the other speakers. Of course, your Superior General, Brother John, has spoken about Fratelli Tuti, and we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'm basing my sharing on these two very important documents, 10 December 1948 and 4th October 2020, the document in which we, all our countries here in the Asia Pacific zone, have signed this. We are signatories to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And what the Pope has given to us, what Brother John has already said, was that originally it was meant to be about interreligious dialogue and things like that. Now the scope of this document is so large, so big, that actually it is frightening even to try to read it, not because of its size, but because of the challenges in it. Let me try to visit not the countries, each of the countries, but certain dimensions of rights which I think need to be looked into in these countries of the area that we are addressing today. And just now I'm taking just 5 of them. Anything from the 30 Universal Declaration of Human Rights and from what the Pope is talking about in Fratelli Tuti, we can take several more. But I'm trying to focus on 5. First of all is the shrinking space of democracy, the emergence and perhaps the mainstreaming of totalitarianism, authoritarianism, and shades of fascism. It covers many things, but I'm taking it as a singular. Then there is the right to freedom of speech and expression, dissent. Can we make our voices heard? Are they confining church and religious congregations in each of these countries, very especially in my country, India, only to what you call the CCM, the church compound mentality, or the convent or congregational compound mentality, and be there and don't do anything else? Then come the freedom of religion and belief. We are talking about proclamation, having a prophetic role. How does one understand this freedom of religion and belief in the here and now, in our context today, in each of our countries? The right to work, unemployment, about migrants, about refugees, and finally the rights of women and children. I've taken 5. Let's try to look at each one of them, even if I'm just spending less than a couple of minutes on each one. First of all, the shrinking space of democracy. Let's visit each of the countries we are living in today. Let's look at the United States of America. And I'm sure there is a brother there at 3 a.m. in the United States and so on. And look at the speeches both of Joe Biden and of Kamala Harris. Look at the tone of the speeches and look at what the CNN commentator, Anthony Van Jones, said while he was being interviewed on Saturday morning America time. He broke down, he wept, and millions the world saw him. He says, finally, I can go home tonight to tell my children there is still character left. He was talking now we can breathe. If you're talking about the United States, on one hand, what more is happening in countries like India, or perhaps in Thailand? We know what's happening in Thailand, the protest, what's happening in countries like Sri Lanka, and so on. While some of the countries really do not profess to be democracies, and I'm sure those of you who are in the Philippines are listening to me, look at how people are gunned down there just for suspecting that they are peddling or belong to a drug mafia without any kind of evidence. How do we do it? How do we ensure that this democratic space, which is very important for every single citizen, after the World War II, the world came together and said, never again. That is why we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in a democracy, in any country, whether you profess, that you're a democracy or not, you have a constitution. And every single constitution does give this kind of freedom to at least be a democracy, be in a democratic setup. Malaysia is one of those countries, and some of you are there in Malaysia, that has several restrictive practices. And we know that. There are Human Rights Watch reports, there is Amnesty International reports, and so in Singapore. While there is a kind of veneer that, there are human rights and so on, new legislation, new laws kind of shrink democracy. Related to the first point is my second point, dissent. The moment you dissent, the moment you question, the moment you challenge the system, you have had it. Just now, many of you will know, a fellow Jesuit of mine, Father Stan Swami, he's 83 years old. He's languishing in jail. In India, we have a dreaded law called the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. It's basically an anti-terrorism law. And just now what the government says, even if I suspect you of having some inkling with anyone who might or might not be a terrorist, I can arrest you literally without bail. You cannot be free. And there are several others all over the country, but particularly 15 who have been arrested because of a Bhima Koregaon case, who are there languishing in jail just because they dissented, just because they sided with a company, the poorest of the poor, which your kind of spirit of your Justice Secretariat is speaking about, walking with the poor, which Pope Francis speaks so much about in Fratelli Tuti. Dissent is something is not welcome in most of our countries, especially in Asia today. They don't welcome dissent. They don't welcome anyone questioning the status quo, the system. And if you have to change things, what is happening, especially in a country like India, we need to question. Fortunately, some of us, rather many of us, are questioning the system. It's not easy. We really do not know when we will be put in jail, incarcerated, or just like several journalists and human rights activists, defenders in India, you are just done away with, or you just disappear, as is happening in so many countries of Asia, and even the countries we are working in. People who question just disappear. The third is the freedom of religion and belief. We have here in my state of Gujarat a horrible law called the Freedom of Religion Law. Basically, if I want to change my religion, I need to take the permission of the district collector. It's a British terminology. The civil head of a particular area which goes perhaps beyond the city. And that person can ask me, why do I want to convert and things like that. Now, the point is religion and belief is a personal thing. You cannot have laws. And in several states of India, we have what we call anti-conversion law. If I'm speaking about proclamation, if I'm speaking about the word, if I'm saying I need to be a preacher, like St. Louis de Montfort, okay, don't I have the right to perhaps go and share the good news with people around me? It's not only about me preaching. Is also if I want to embrace another religion, especially a minority religion in a country like India and in several other countries which we are talking to just now, I cannot do it. I might be sent to prison, and there are any kinds of laws that are taking place. None of here from the group are working in Pakistan. Pakistan has these horrible blasphemy laws, but in many parts of Asia today, we lack this freedom of religion and belief. So at that time, I told the civil authority, who was a friend of mine, Anita Karwal, I said, Madam, if I've stopped believing in God at this moment, I've become an atheist. And from believing in a God to not believing in a God is also a conversion. Now, who are you to tell me you continue believing in your God? You cannot not believe in a God. It's absolutely ridiculous. But these are happening in countries like India. We have seen what has happened in the pandemic. That's the fourth. Millions of workers in India and several other countries were walking home. They lost their jobs. And even today, in many of our populated countries, there are many people who are unemployed. They don't even, and many of them are daily wagers. Many of the countries that we are speaking to have ordinary people, poor people, marginalized people excluded. Here in India, we have even people who are refugees, say the Rohingyas, who have come in from Myanmar, where you are not working, and been in India. But they are treated horribly. They are treated as though as though they are no longer citizens. They are no longer human beings, and not given the necessary rights of which every migrant and refugees need to have, and which Pope Francis feels that is enjoining to each one of us. Then what is happening in India? Many of our countries here are highly patriarchal societies. Women are second class. They are treated, we have a lot of domestic violence. In India, we have had lots of rape cases. And we have had, like recently, we have had a terrible rape incident in a place called Hathras in UP. And suddenly the victim becomes a perpetrator. She is at fault. Her family is at fault because those who control us, those who control our system, ultimately call the shots. This is what is happening just now to another journalist who has always been spewing hate and violence over TV. He has been arrested for abetment of suicide for another reason. And now the whole system is siding with him, saying that about freedom of speech and expression, the rights of journalism is being curtailed when he's been arrested. So see how ruling regimes in several of our countries are not looking at things objectively, but terribly subjectively. If you're a victim and if you protest, and if there are others protesting on your behalf, then virtually all is lost. You are named, maybe even the perpetrator of the crime. On the same line are also children. We have millions of child laborers here. In my state of Gujarat, we have plenty of them coming from the neighboring state of Rajasthan to work in the cotton fields. There in South India, we have many working in the quarries and so on. I've not used purposely environment, the rights of the indigenous peoples, the tribals, the Dalits and so on, because all of them suffer one way or the other from each of these 5 main rights that I've spoken about. I'm hoping at the end of the session, there will be, I'm reaching my time. I want to end with the words of our poet laureate, Rabindranath Tagore, who gave us that beautiful prayer which I'm sure many of us know, where the mind is without fear, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depths of truth into that heaven of freedom. My Father, let not merely my country, but each of the countries here, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, the countries in the Pacific and elsewhere awake. Because unless we respond in this post-pandemic era to the challenges, we will never change. And for the opportunities that religious brothers have is there in number 2, in Fratelli Tuti. I think Pope Francis was thinking of this assembly when he wrote this. And in number 274, he enjoins every single disciple of Jesus get involved in political action in the here and now. God bless each one of you, the organizers, the congregation, the senior leadership of the congregation, and all the participants gathered here. And thank you for your patience in listening to me. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Cedric. As always, you have been very inspirational. Yours is one of the most prominent voices on behalf of human rights, protection of human rights in the church in India. Thank you for this message. In the post-colonial era, the countries that became free after India in the 40s, in the late 40s and in the 50s, the one thing that was common is that each of the constitutions of these countries incorporated human rights as adopted in the UDHR as part of their constitutions. Today, each of these rights that had become so fundamental to human existence has become not only compromised but are under threat. And you have pointed out 5 of those that are under grave threat in the countries in Asia: the shrinking space of democracy, the threat to the right to dissent, the threat to the freedom of religion and belief, one's conscience, the right to work, employment, and livelihood, and the rights of women and children. Precisely these rights are under threat in each of the countries in Asia today where the Brothers of St. Gabriel are working. And as you concluded, saying perhaps we will need to move from services that we have been providing, services that the Brothers of St. Gabriel have been providing, to political consciousness and political action. This, I think, is a challenge before the Brothers of St. Gabriel in the post-pandemic era. Thank you, Father Cedric. Now I call upon somebody from almost the center of Africa, Mike Davis. Mike Davis lives in Harare, in Zimbabwe. He will speak to us on the human rights situation in Africa and what are the steps that we can take. Mike is the coordinator for Anglophone Africa for the International Alliance of Inhabitants. He has been a grassroots activist for the protection of human rights most of his life. From what he has narrated to me personally, what I have read of him, he is currently involved in developing a Pan-African network of inhabitants that will link and support local struggles for dignity and security, especially for the marginalized urban citizens throughout Africa. Welcome, Mike, to this conference. Over to you, Mike.
Great, thanks, brother. I appreciate this opportunity very much indeed. Good morning, everybody. Well, good afternoon from Zimbabwe. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in this meeting and to address your community. I have been tasked with providing a perspective of the current situation in Africa regarding human rights. This is an impossible task, of course, and one can merely touch upon the issues that are affecting us. I will try and paint broad strokes, which will give you a taste of the situation and the various threats that are affecting us here in Africa. You will find, of course, that many of our struggles are the same. As the brother said earlier, we are struggling for dignity and respect, no matter where we are in the world. And it is a task of all activists, be they of faith or otherwise, to seek out an alternative world based on justice and respect for everybody. As Brother Vargas said, I'm a local democratic activist in Harare, Zimbabwe, and I work mainly at the neighborhood level, developing community responses to the many threats that affect us here in my city. But apart from this local work, which I believe is the basis of a democratic country, building from the bottom up is critical. You cannot build from the top down. So I, through my work at the local level, gradually endorsed international solidarity. And for the past 10 years, I've been working with the International Alliance of Inhabitants as a coordinator for Anglophone Africa, trying to develop links between struggles, activists, and communities across our country. The Alliance is a global network of social organizations. Its objective is to give voice and international impact to people who have been evicted, who are facing evictions, who are in situations of poor shelter and bad housing, and to those that are homeless. We seek to bring people together to talk about their own stories. We do not appropriate their voices and speak on their behalf, as so many of our NGO colleagues seem to do, but we provide a platform for the actual voices of the oppressed and marginalized. We've been going for about 17 years now, and we've run a number of programs which I'll touch later on in this presentation. But to get back to the topic in hand, I'm afraid the human rights environment in Africa is extremely poor. Even before COVID-19, we had only a handful of countries out of 54, only 6 can be regarded as free in a general sense. 6 out of 54 countries. And even in those 6 countries, people still face arrest and oppression. Journalists get detained, activists get arrested. So really, I would say to call even those 6 countries free is highly contentious at the current stage. There's widespread political repression. Just this last week, opposition leaders have been arrested in Uganda and Tanzania. In Uganda, Bobi Wine was arrested merely for registering. So, we have these arrests even in supposedly democratic countries like Tanzania. And this means our political systems are very fragile. We are, as are many countries in Asia, subject to the whole charismatic big man idea, where there is a leader who will take us out of our situation and take us somewhere else. But these big men invariably turn out to be frauds, to be dictators, and merely pursuing their own personal interests and the interests of their political class at the expense of our people. Of course, as people know, in Africa, we face a lot of military conflict. There are military struggles going on right across a broad swathe from Somalia to Mauritania, Mali. These armed conflicts also are a reflection of the weakness of our state institutions, which cannot provide the security in which people can pursue their faith, their livelihoods, and their lives. Human rights in a military zone are pretty much non-existent, and we have to end the military conflicts before we can start to develop a culture of human rights in those countries. Africa is probably one of the more militarized continents in the world now. There are 7 countries with military bases in just Djibouti, one small little port in the Red Sea, has 7 nations building military bases. The United States of America has 29 bases in Africa. These are not there for the benefit of our people. They are there to preserve the interests of Western elites in collaboration with the local elites that divert resources that should go into building better lives for our people, that go into military hardware, gleefully sold to them by Western powers to use against other African brothers. We see the conflict developing in Tigray at the moment in Ethiopia. Both sides are armed by the same people. I'm lost for words at the contempt in which our people are held in this situation. These military conflicts and the instability they have created are the root cause of the waves of migrants who seek a better life elsewhere. I do not have space or time to go into the human rights abuses that have been visited upon our brothers and sisters trying to flee to a safer life, not necessarily a better economic life, but at least a safer life outside of Africa. The key crisis in Africa is the failure of states to defend their people against armed aggression, whether it is by the state or by armed groups, extra state actors who reject the states. So this must be the work of civil activists, the churches and others to try and mitigate against this wave of violence in our continent. Of course, the military violence is mirrored by civil conflicts that are taking place, not necessarily militaristic in nature, but people rising up in protest, people who have had enough in Sudan, Malawi, Guinea, Mali, my country, Zimbabwe. People have risen up in the last few years to protest against dictators, to protest against the abuse of their human rights. The popular uprising in Sudan took us all by surprise. So while I'm painting a gloomy picture, there are rays of hope. There are struggles simmering underneath, away from public media, in all our countries. There are groups of brave men and women who are seeking to address these crises. And the whole purpose of my presentation today is to build international solidarity. I strongly urge our brothers and sisters in India and Asia to reach out to community groups and organizations in Africa. You have a lot to teach us. Your struggles for democracy have been going on for well over a century and a half. And we can teach you as well. We have many lessons to bring to an exchange about our common humanity. However, to return to the story of gloom, we have media problems in Africa. Just this week, the government of Ethiopia, whose prime minister won a Nobel Peace Prize last year, has cut off internet and telephone communications to the Tigray province. Countries do this all the time in Africa. Tanzania cut its internet briefly during the elections, and my country too. If there's the slightest hint of any social coordination of opposition, bang goes the internet. So media is a problem both for our communications to each other, but also what we can read. Just last week, a brave reporter here in Zimbabwe was arrested for criticizing a judge's decision about a corruption case. He's already spent 50 days in jail for exposing government corruption. Right across the continent, journalists face imprisonment and a lack of freedom in which to report upon our situation. So we are blocked from understanding what's going on, not only in our own countries, but next door. Most Zimbabweans do not know what's happening in Mozambique, for instance. And it is my vision that we break down these silos that we're locked into, and we can act in solidarity with struggling communities in the north of Mozambique or elsewhere. This, I think, is one of the biggest contributions the church can make, because you already have social networks that link and support people in their struggles. You can be the engine that promotes an internationalist solidarity. I will post a brief report, if anyone is interested, on different aspects of human rights in Africa. You know, there are issues around health care and others which have been hugely impacted by COVID. But I'd like to talk briefly about a matter dear to my heart, which is evictions of our people right across Africa. Not only those people displaced by war and internal conflict, but those who are ejected from their ancestral lands to build a sugarcane plantation. Those that have, in my country, are being evicted to grow lucerne for a dairy corporation. These are the struggles our people are facing because they do not have security of tenure in their land, even though they've been living there for, in some cases, hundreds of years. The plunder and pillage by corporate interests acting in conjunction with our local elites is rampant in Africa. At the moment, I think we've had more than 40,000 people forcefully evicted just in the last 6 months in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. And these are things where the church can get actively involved to help those communities to understand their options, to intercede with the local authorities and national governments for moratorium on evictions, and then to facilitate dialogue between the opposing groups to seek an equitable and justiciable solution that puts people at the center of our activities, not corporate interests or overseas development projects. On the matter of international solidarity, which I'd like to close upon, it's important to develop international solidarity with and between communities facing threats to their rights. Peer-to-peer exchanges, in my experience, are the most rewarding events. To see people's eyes light up when they talk about their struggles and they get empathy, they get solidarity from other people facing the same struggles. This is one of the most rewarding emotions that an organizer can get. When you see those sparks flying and the discussion of what people have done, what they can do, what they can't do, that brew is a very heady mixture. And a lot of our work in the International Alliance of Inhabitants is to create these spaces in which people can exchange their ideas and experiences. We run the World Assemblies of Inhabitants and its regional sessions in Asia, in Africa, and South America. We have had very successful gatherings of people from international networks, right down to people Zooming us from a village in the south of Kenya with the cows and the chickens in the background. It's wonderful. It is a non-hierarchical space in which people can dialogue. We also run the International Tribunal on Evictions. This is an annual or biannual event where communities facing evictions can submit cases to an international panel of jurists. We select, well, in pre-COVID times, we would bring representatives of the communities to a space to present those cases. Our panel of jurists, who include lawyers and activists, would then make recommendations based on the evidence that the communities may then use as a tool for negotiation with their governments or with those that seek to dispossess them. That international solidarity should never be underestimated. I know many of us, and I suspect it's a problem in India too, live within our own national bubbles. We are Indian, we are Zimbabwean, we are Brazilian. These are just arbitrary boxes that keep us from reaching our common humanity. And we must struggle in all our work to project an internationalist approach. We are not different. Our struggles are the same. We want shelter, we want food, we want health. We have the physical needs that we need to live a good life. And then we have the rights, not only human rights, but economic, social, and cultural rights that need to be respected. COVID-19 has forced us all to adjust. I don't know, but I seem to spend endless days on Zoom. But this is really an opportunity. I miss the local contact of being able to hug my brothers and sisters in the struggle, but I would never get to speak to such a wide grouping as yours that is here today, and to present just one perspective on current situation in Africa. As I say, I have prepared a small document with links to various human rights reports and local contacts in countries in Africa. I would urge all of you to reach out, to investigate, and start to forge linkages with local groups in Africa. You know, I suppose like the Twin City program that our urban authorities develop, we should have twin organizations that we nurture, mentor, learn from, act in solidarity. Once again, I would like to thank Brother Varghese and the whole group of organizers that have contributed to these 3 days. Unfortunately, work demands that I leave you all soon, but I will catch up with the video recordings of the meeting. And once again, thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mike. It has been a pleasure listening to you. Africa, the 54 countries of Africa. As you said, the human rights situation is extremely challenging. It is only 6 countries out of 54 that are free armed conflicts and failure of institutions that make living in Africa extremely dangerous. And the migrations that take place because of not for economic opportunities, but simply because people want to live, to save themselves, the threat to the media, the evictions that take place, the corporate elites and the local elites that gather together for profit, and how the poor suffer, are evicted from their farmlands and from their homes. And as you said, internationality is the medicine that can heal. And the COVID provides an opportunity for us all across the world to link, to express solidarity, to forge unity and unified action. And I think this is an extremely important insight. Thank you. We will share the link that you have on the situation of human rights in Africa. We shall share it with the participants and others. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike, for being there. Thank you. It's my privilege now to welcome Reina Braganza. She is based in the city of Pune. She is a teacher by training. In fact, I was told she was a gold medalist both for her B.Ed and M.Ed from the Bombay University. She worked as a teacher. But her choice really is human rights law, Islamic studies, comparative religion, especially looking at from the feminist point of view. And that has been her choice. And she is a trainer in all these aspects. Reina will speak to us today on what Mavo called half the sky, women who have experienced and experience discrimination simply because they are women. In fact, we have in MSI, we have the Montfort rainbows. We have one of our team members who is a transgender, and she continuously tells us simply because the pure nature of her birth and her gender, how she is discriminated. In other words, gender discrimination is a reality in our minds, in our societies, in our institutions, and we need to find remedies as Montfortans, as brothers. So, Reina, please take over the mic.
Thanks, Verghese. Thanks to you and your organizing team for the opportunity to present. I've titled mine Transforming Gender Relations to Ensure Gender Equality in God's Kingdom. I went onto your website. From what I found, Jesus Christ is our inspiration, our rule of life, our model, guide, and our goal. Christ, the Gabriel brothers, education is your main way in which you intervene to build God's kingdom. And the Global Learning Network with information, inspiration, and insights for integrated life and holistic society. And the spirit-filled force you believe is behind all these initiatives in the Montfort Brothers of St. Gabriel. Engaging the individuals and society for a better future as children of God has been and shall be the goal of this fellowship without borders. It is an inclusive education process. And the SERI network talks across the world from information to knowledge to intelligence and wisdom. These are great ideals. I'm going to take you through a rapid fire round right now. And I'm going to ask you, I'm going to make a few statements and write down the answer that comes to your mind first. If you don't, just remember it. Men are more liberated than women. Do you agree or not? Do you see yourself as a man? For the few ladies over here, as a woman, or do you see yourself as primarily human? Dealing with gender inequality and women's liberation is most exclusively the responsibility of women. Do you believe that you are a feminist? And when I'm saying feminist, I mean someone who believes in equal rights of all, irrespective of ethnicity, gender, sexuality, race, ability. If you think you are a feminist, bring to your mind something that you have done to address any of these inequalities. As an individual, what have you done? As part of the institution you belong to, as part of an organization that you belong to, what have you done? Any one thing. Do you believe that men have more power and are able to exercise power more easily in social and religious spaces? The role of men is to protect women and to provide opportunities for their representation. The emotional nature of women is a disadvantage for them in making decisions. Women today make an issue of everything. They see abuse and violation in everything. They have lost their sense of proportion. The problem is social conditioning. Nothing can be done to bring about a real change as far as gender inequality. Women are equally responsible as men for the inequality they face. Women perpetuate the culture of patriarchy as they are the prime transmitters of culture. Women's empowerment is the reason for the increase in domestic violence. Women are as responsible as men for the abuse and violence they face. They flout the culturally acceptable norms of dress, public movement, and behavior expected of them. You, each one of you, brothers out there, accept and enjoy the privileges of being a male and the double privilege of being a male who is religious. This iceberg out here. The visible culture is what you would give if you've been giving certain answers. They are what you would like to maybe project, or it is, what you must remember is it's based on what is below the surface, what is the unseen culture, your background, your upbringing, your exposure to situations of inequality, the amount of time you've spent listening. And based on that, what are the values and beliefs you have about gender inequality? What is the worldview that you subscribe? Because that is the core of you as you have grown up. All of us are so in gender roles, patterns, etc. And this begins from the time we are born, where we are taught, we see it built in our families, we see it reinforced in the education system, by media, by language, by the legal systems, our institutions, our culture, and as a result, we learn patterns of behavior. Earlier, when I went to church and I heard some saying, sons of God, my brothers, I would respond because excluded. Today, it affects me even if I hear brothers and sisters. Because when someone refers to us as brothers and sisters, I know that there are so many more others who are excluded. And even if it was just one in the congregation or in the audience, that person is excluded. And this socialization, which we have learned, is what leads to the attitudes and beliefs and values that we have and the kind of binary that we have. And this could be anything from men versus women, or it could be women among themselves, the stronger versus the weaker, the mother-in-law versus the daughter-in-law. Among men, it could be the ones in power versus the ones who don't have the power. It could be across any spectrum. Now, the consequences of socialization is we learn the rubrics of the us-them equation. It makes people establish an identity, who they are. So if you're a transgender or you're a woman or whatever gender, or you're a man, so the social exposure that you have either gives you a positive identity, a positive self-concept, or a diffident concept. You're diffident to promote who you are. You prefer being in the background. Socialization tells us what kind of behavior is acceptable socially and form. It tells us about the roles, the expectations, the values, the way we must communicate, and the attitudes we must have. Now, sometimes we forget that this is unconscious in building who we are. You as Montfort brothers are part of the circles of learning, of socializing. Through your institutions, through the work that you do, and through the witness of your life. And you do this in engaging, as you say on your website, individuals and society for a better future. Count the number of institutions and the amount of work you have put in, the number of people whose lives. Do the people leave your institutions, or the ones who come in touch with you, see themselves more clearly as children of God? Now, I'm going back to something which is a word which was lost and now is coming back in fashion, so spoken in patriarchy. Though it originally meant role of the father, it is now about men and women. Today, role is power. Our individual situation through your educational institution, through your missionary work, your NGOs, you have control over the culture you are shaping. Patriarchy is a system, it's an institutionalized political, just invisible, but all encompassing. It's an ideology. And because it's an ideology, a set of values and beliefs, the prominent social group, they're believed to be unquestionable. Religion says it's unquestionable. The church in particular. Just last Sunday, I had a bishop saying men and women are ontological and therefore we must not question them. Patriarchy presents itself therefore as something which is natural, of power and order. It's not a male-female thing, it's a mindset. And all of us have been trained into accepting it and maybe subconsciously even supporting it. We are all complicit in upholding the system, and the system of patriarchy, privilege. Privilege is having an unbenefit or advantage just because of your identity as male, as religious male. Patriarchy depends on binary and therefore gender roles. Because someone has to be inferior, someone has to be superior. Someone has to be in control, someone has to maintain the power and order. And we all lose when people are treated unfairly and not on the merit of the person. And you, dear brothers, as privileged gender, you need to confront your own privileges and recognize that the inequality helps no one. Each one of us is able to undermine the system of oppression if we refuse to live with unchecked or unacknowledged privilege. And it will come in small ways. You visit a religious congregation, a mission, or a reflection session, and then you will be treated with subservience. You will be given certain privileges and the kind of things that the way they attend to you. Are you going to accept it unchecked? Or are you going to pretend it doesn't happen? Or are you oblivious to it happening? Now, if you believe in your mind that you are not patriarchal, that's not enough. Adrienne Maree Brown reminds us, release any belief that your mind will liberate you from patriarchy. The change required now is not something you can learn or do with your mind alone. It is something you must practice with your body, emotions, soul. Only consistent practice will rewire your mind and liberate your life. And I think Brother John Kalarakkal said something like this, spoke about it like a call to assimilate the changes you want to see, assimilate them into your own life. Practice them. Be conscious of what you are not doing and what you are doing to perpetuate patriarchy. Patriarchy lives within us. This system, the question, all of us have an inner patriarch, whether we are men or whether we are women. As a mother, I do this with my daughter, and she can keep our girls and women safe. And so we want them in well-defined of space. Inner patriarchy tells us that we must value men's decisions, which are rational and logical. It questions women's intelligence and abilities, because women are emotional. They are long-winded. They'll go around stories before they come to the point. And they get frazzled by their many involvements. Even coming to address all you brothers was causing me internal turbulence. My subject came in. The inner patriarch wants to protect existing social norms, heterosexuality, of marriage, of demeanor, gender-based violence that we are seeing. And remember, our statistics, Vadi spoke about how transgenders and other genders also violence record of it. It is not knowledge because they are not. This violence is a manifestation of historically unequal power, our relations, and the relative ineffectiveness of the systems to combat it. Whether it is the legal system, the police, whatever. And all that is because of the outcome of behavior learned in society are built around domination and power. And how do we see this patriarchal mindset manifesting itself? It blames the victim. It expects the woman to adjust and then wonders why they go through abuse for a long time without complaining. It doesn't molestation seriously. It's difficult to understand the different forms of gender-based violence as equally offensive. Rape will we make a noise, but emotional, financial, verbal, all is abuse, which is affecting the identity in so-called other gender. You cannot be blind to the system, this invisible system of privilege of which 140 countries between men and women. Yet the countries, as we've heard our friend from Africa saying, laws and policy stereotypes, social norms and practices always discriminate against them. It's very easy to confuse what is with what ought to be, especially when what is has worked out in your favor. So therefore, to be precise, the word religious connotation, I put that for 3 Ds, IUEM. The women and other genders in the world feel disrespected, discriminated, devalued, infantilized, unseen, excluded, and marginalized. And where does all this freedom happen? First, in access to rights. We're the bottom of the rung. And if women are the bottom of the poverty runners, how much lower they are. We don't have access to our own identities, to opportunities, to safety. Socially, healthcare, the women and other genders get the dregs of the healthcare system. Education, skill development, nourishment, early and forced marriage, relationship, family safety are all areas of discrimination and being excluded. Economic. Because of COVID times, access to resources for the resources that are available are limited, and women and other genders get what's left over. Women are the ones who have lost employment to a large extent. They have unpaid care burdens. The employment that they have is underpaid or unpaid. The work environments are not safe. Politically, women experience a triduum where decision making is concerned, where there are opportunities for leadership. And if you answer that men need to make the spaces for us for leadership, then you need to question, because that is a patriarchal mindset. You don't have to create anything for us. You don't have to allow us. You don't have to permit us. You have to just make sure we get what is our right. Another part of the triduum that women experience in the world is they are vulnerable to abuse and violence. No right over their own body, over their choices. The responsibility for shame and honor of the family or community is put on them. There is the internalized patriarchy, and they are forced into compromises. Now, the triduum is also experienced in the church. Sexism and misogyny are woven into dogma and traditions. Men are believed to be higher spiritual authority to others. We do not allow, the church does not allow ordination of women into the clergy. And yet important offices of jurisdiction, teaching, decision-making, administrative bodies are linked to priesthood. The use of religious texts to justify this inequality as divinely dictated and ordained. Limited jobs are available. Even if someone is called as a resource person, the men receive a higher honorarium than women. Male hegemony is legitimized, perpetuated without any self-criticism in the church. And sexual exploitation within the church, under submission and misuse of authority, and the wrong understanding of obedience. And unfortunately, there are no support mechanisms without the church or outside the church. So where do women go for help? As I said, our leadership roles, if there are some, they are restricted. We have in India a priest who is the secretary of the Commission for the Laity. And if you have a woman, supervision of, so what happens is the women's voices are unheard. The perspective and the vote is missed out. And unfortunately, women are either erased from the lectionaries of their role in salvation history has been excluded, or scripture is given a patriarchal interpretation, and yet Jesus was all about inclusivity. He had male and female disciples, he had male and female imagery. He gave the keys to Peter, but he sent Mary Magdalene to announce his resurrection. We need to ask ourselves, what is really sacred? Respecting the traditions of the bygone era or basic principles of social justice? And let us not let patriarchy say that it is needed to maintain structure and order, because that is the slippery slope to enabling a culture of violence. How can we promote this integrated life and holistic society you talk about as Montfortians, and engaging individuals and society for a better future as children of God? How can we work to make sure that we are understanding and undermining the system of oppression and privilege that hurts us all? And to create change, therefore, we need to reflect, what can your institutions do? Your educational institutions. What is it doing that is promoting this system? We reflect on that and consciously choose to act and challenge the privileges you have individually and the attitude you are creating, being privileged, and seek our representatives of all genders in leadership and this. And fourth, extend this conversation to your friends, friends, community members, people you work with. Our efforts have to be continued, conscious, multidimensional. We are as persons, if change in men's consciousness, to change the cultural norms and exclusionary very quickly. For your institutions, do your vision, goals, principles have an explicit commitment to promoting or achieving gender equality? Does your target population purposely include all genders? Have all genders participated in the following stages, whether it is design, implementation, monitoring and evaluation of your programs? Have steps been taken to ensure equal participation of representative genders? Do all genders as team members have an equal role in decision making? Does your policy or program consider life conditions and opportunities for all genders? Does the policy or program include women's practical and strategic needs? Something as simple as using the washrooms in male houses. Women need a dustbin and it's never there. Does the language you use exclude or privilege one sex? Do your materials and publications portray men and women based on gender-based stereotypes? Does your program address gender inequality in skill development to help other genders integrate into the economy? If you want to be an ally, then work alongside those who are marginalized and be their voice, not your voice, as Mike was saying. Listen to what their situation is. As an ally, your voice should not be the loudest. Let's get active. Action is called for. You should read, study, unlearn what you know, and relearn about gender relations. And let the Holy Spirit be your guide. Being an ally means taking on the struggle as your own. So educate, facilitate critical questioning, don't reinforce gender role stereotypes, study scripture, doctrine, inclusive language, etc. from the gender perspective, enable all to understand their call to equality of discipleship, and empower them to enjoy fullness of life. You're called to be prophetic in your community, religious congregation, workplace, etc. What can you do to bring about this change? At the personal level, at your circle of influence. Examine your personal attitudes, etc. Question the realities and acquire new patterns of behavior. Remember, keeping silent is not spiritual, because it is the truth that sets us all free. Because when evil is brought into the light, the rampant cancer of it withers. And because our God is the true God, and his people are called to speak true words. Thank you.
Thank you, Reina, for that very insightful, very erudite presentation. Challenging, basically challenging us to, as one of your slides, final slide said, unlearn so that we can relearn. And I think this is a privilege precisely the brothers by your vocation have. We are people who are given to being brothers as our fundamental calling and fundamental vocation. And this very vocation that we have received impels us to be free, to be footloose, to embrace inclusiveness, not only in terms of how and what we do with, deal with, work with the most vulnerable people, but women who face immense discrimination because of their gender. Thank you, Reina, for that very insightful presentation. We shall be sharing the PowerPoint that you presented with the participants. Hopefully it will be available. Thank you, Reina. Now I call upon the last speaker of this evening, this morning really, for Rob Robinson. It must be around 6 a.m. in the morning. And congratulations, Rob. I must begin by congratulating Rob. You have a new president, and I know you have worked very hard during these elections to get the president that you wanted. Rob is a person exuding with passion, and you will soon realize passion and commitment to the causes that are closest to his heart. He had the experience of being homeless, of living in a shelter home. he lost his job, and I think that was the most transformative experience that Rob had, of taking on the cause of the homeless and fighting for the rights, the housing rights of people. He has been a very important actor in the campaign to restore housing rights through Land and Housing Action Group of Take Back the Land movement. That was particularly did considerable work, especially in the first decade of this millennium. And he is a part of the Human Rights Network. He is on the organizing committee with Mike, whom we met. I am privileged to be part of this committee that organizes every couple of years the International Tribunal on Evictions. We are members together of the International Alliance of Inhabitants, and I have seen Robin to be a relentless fighter against all types of discrimination, whether based on religion, based on caste, based on race. And Rob played an extremely important role in the recent Black Lives Matter movement in New York City. He is a political activist, a grassroots worker, a great organizer with his links not only in the United States, but in many countries in South America, in Europe, also in Asia through people like us. So Rob, now the mic is yours. Thank you for staying. Thank you for coming in so early and staying on to talk to us. Thank you, Rob.
Brother Varghese and fellow comrades, thank you. This is an honor, and you know it's special for me to get up 3:30 in the morning. It must be a special occasion, and you know, if you get invited to an event by Brother Varghese, you make sure you're present. So you have had a very powerful influence in my organizing. When I mention your name in Indian communities here in New York City, I always get wide eyes and people listening closely. So it's important for me to be in this space. So thank you to the organizers of this webinar, especially the Montfort Institute and Brother Varghese. And I was blessed to travel to India in December of 2016 to attend a wedding of a university student I mentored in New York City, who was from India. And you know, based on Raina's comments, I want to inject a couple of stories into my talk today. And one of those stories is how I got to India. And there was two Indian students at the New School University in New York who I mentored in a master's degree program in urban planning, who upon graduation, there was a week of events at the school around the graduation, and parents had traveled from their respective countries to participate in these events. And Shivani, one of the Indian students, I walked into a room during a breakfast, and she took a selfie with her cell phone with me, and she brought me over to her parents and introduced me to her parents. And the dad said, Rob, and he looked at me in a strange way, and I said, yes. And he says, oh, no, don't be concerned. We just, every time we ask Shivani about her studies, all we hear is Rob this and Rob that. So we were interested in meeting this Rob, so we say hello. And then the dad looks at me and says, Rob, we asked her what she wanted as a graduation present. And she said, I want Rob to come to India. And there was another student in the class, Masoom, who was getting married the following December. So the two families got together and sponsored a 2-week trip for me to come to India. And during that trip, I spent a week with Varghese in Hyderabad and met marginalized and disenfranchised people in many of the slums. And they welcomed me into their homes with open arms, as if I was a member of a long lost family. And it's something that I will never forget. It left quite an impact on me. So I want to again thank Brother Varghese for leading by example and continuing to unite us all across borders, right? As he stated in his opening, we'd like to do these things in person, but technology showed us that we could get together on a regular basis if we make the effort. So I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be here on this special day. Today is very special in the US. Not only do we have a new president-elect, and a new vice president-elect, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But today, and I don't know if Brother Varghese and the folks who organized this event know this, but the U.S. is scheduled to go before something called the Universal Periodic Review in a couple of hours in Geneva, right? Which is very powerful. And, you know, for the last couple of months, I've been working with groups around the country, particularly the U.S. Human Rights Network, to get stories of struggle into the voices of different missions from around the world. And those struggles primarily focus on structural racism, homelessness, housing, lack of access to water, and proper sanitation. In the wealthiest country in the world, people still struggle around these issues. As you heard Brother Varghese say, I'm formerly homeless. I spent 2 years on the streets of Miami and 10 months in a New York City homeless shelter. And that transformed me to the way I think. And to speak back to Sister Raina, this is what made me open up my mind, and it transformed me and says, okay, who are those voices that are marginalized? I need to lift up those voices, right? And the fact that you're painting everybody, or the United States tends to paint us with a broad brush, I don't want to be painted with those strokes. And then I need to find others whose voices have been suppressed, oppressed, and repressed, and lift up those voices of struggle. And through my work, trying to get people into homes, from homeless to homes, a lot of that is involved taking over property. And I've been arrested a number of times doing that work. But what is incredible is something a precinct commander reminded me of about 10 years ago. He said to me, the last time I was arrested, between the people standing out in the foyer and the people calling on the phone, there are 35 lawyers that represent you. Which one is yours? And I said, all of them. He says, I don't know what you have going on, but these are a lot of Indian women that say they represent you that are law schools. So I'm always indebted to the Indian community for the support and the legal support I've received from them. And it's women that come to, for lack of a better way to say, rescue me from the oppression that I'm facing as an African-American man. And I'm grateful to that. And then I think the second way, and sort of a response to Raina, is working with Dalit Women Fight. There is a strong movement in India around this issue, and they've traveled to the US, and I've supported their events, been there face to face, because I've lived that life. You know, we don't have, quote unquote, a caste system in the US. We do, but it's undercover, right? We have been marginalized as people of color. You know, this country was built on structural racism, whether or not we want to admit it. And we just were able to vote a president out who continued structural racism and white supremacy. So it's been an effort by all of us to make these changes. And, you know, we continue today with the Universal Periodic Review as a human rights enforcer. And I use the word enforcer rather than defender, because I believe human rights exist. I'm not defending anything. If it's the law, it exists, right? So I'm enforcing the law that is on the books. But we have an exceptionalist attitude in the US that we're this great democracy and we don't violate human rights. And I would say that is a myth, and that is as far from the truth as possible. So it's important for people like myself to lift up those voices of struggle. So where are we today? Today, we have COVID-19 that highlighted the struggles of homelessness. When the government starts to say things like shelter in place, what does that mean to people who are living in informal settlements on the street, right? There's another thing we don't recognize in the US, informal settlements. Well, the people who live in the metro stations in New York, who live in tents on the street, those are informal settlements, whether the US believes that or not. And, you know, it makes us expose the exceptionalism that exists in the US, because we would never as a country admit to having informal settlements, but we do. When you don't have proper sanitation on the streets, what do people do? So we had to organize. And we organized during COVID because, and let me be clear before I move forward, the problems that I lay out existed from this country's creation 400 years ago, right? So COVID-19 only exacerbated the problems, right? So what happens now? You come back to today, We have vacant hotels all over the city, but we have people juxtaposed against people sleeping on the streets. So we had to organize and say to our government, what about these vacant hotels? You have all of this money. Move these people from congregate shelters where they're sitting close together and move them into these vacant hotels. It only makes sense, right? Utilize the space that is vacant. So a lot of the organizing we've done is around those issues. I do think people are living without food in this country. Again, the wealthiest country in the world. 40% of the food produced in the U.S. ends up in the landfill. It's bizarre. It just makes no sense. But yet we have people that are hungry. We have a problem with education in this country. We would never let you know that, but right now with distant learning, we see an attack on labor. So we cut back teachers because we say we don't have the money to pay the teachers. Yet, if you do it online, you could have one teacher teach 200 students. Makes no sense, but behind the scenes, that's what they're doing. So you're attacking labor, but that happens in other instances too, right? We've lost manufacturing in this country. People are without work. We are a big service sector country, but restaurants are closed down, so people lose their work. So it's a big struggle with respect to COVID, but I think we have a bigger struggle ahead of us. How do we rebuild a society? You know, we do have a president-elect that gave a message of unity on Saturday night, which was special for us to hear because for the last 4 years we experienced white supremacy, division amongst the ranks, and a lot of tension in this country. And it was never more evident for me as somebody on the ground to watch people in a very popular park in New York City on Saturday afternoon. Once it was announced that Biden was declared the winner, people actually jumped in a fountain in Washington Square Park and were dancing naked. I mean, you don't see things like this. President Trump was coming back from his golf course in Virginia, and people lined the streets of Washington, D.C. outside of the White House to shout obscenities at him and say, good riddance, they're tired. So it's a country that was tired. It was a country that wanted change, and it was a country that turned out in record numbers to make sure that that change happened, which was very powerful. Something probably that I haven't experienced in my lifetime, to see so many people come out and vote. We had early voting. By the time Election Day rolled around on Tuesday, November 3rd, we already had 100 million people in this country who had voted early. That's pretty special. That means folks came out in record numbers, and, you know, it just had enough on Election Day. The lines were incredible, but the count continued, and the count continued in a positive direction to make the change that we all wanted to see. So it's important that we continue in this direction. It's important that our new representative rebuild what it was once seen as a strong political position in the world, but was undervalued by the previous administration. When you see other leaders around the world totally disrespect a country and disrespect the president of the United States, something went terribly wrong. Something went amok within that organization, and now we've moved him out. The current president hasn't given a concession speech, but eventually, you know, what is happening now is, you know, he's a loser that just can't admit losing and doesn't want to work with the country to create change and make equal footing for all. I'll close out by saying we have a country that has a constitution that was written on 400 years of good old boy language and was constructed on structural racism from slavery until its current time. Before this Universal Periodic Review, we made an attempt to have a hearing within the Human Rights Council of the UN on structural racism prior to the Universal Periodic Review. We had 660 signatures from different NGOs and political leaders around the world. And our strongest voice within that UN Human Rights Council were the voices of Africa, which has a very strong presence in that Human Rights Council. And our current administration went to those leaders of Africa and said, if you promote this hearing, we will pull back resources to your country, thereby silencing those voices that were voting in favor of on a hearing of structural racism. We did get a commitment, not for a hearing, but to do a report on structural racism. And as we were doing our work with the different missions from around the world, and the last one was with the 44 missions of the European Union last Wednesday, we pushed this issue of structural racism with the killing of George Floyd. You saw it firsthand, how racism was accepted, how police violence against people of African descent was just accepted. When a police officer can put his knee on the back of somebody's neck for over 8 minutes and have his hands in his pocket, it says this is behavior that is accepted by certain sectors of this country, but it's not accepted by all. And I'm grateful to all the comrades around the world that saw the young people go into the streets in the US and said this has to end, and supported it. So that internationalism that Mike so eloquently talked about really showed its face during last May when we had the protests in the streets of the US. So I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to speak at this webinar, to bring forward the voices of an oppressed people in the US, and hopefully change is on the way. We have a president and a vice president-elect, and I neglected to say Kamala Harris is the daughter of an Indian woman and a Jamaican man, and we are fascinated by that whole structure, right? She's a woman of color, first time that has ever happened, so the winds of change are blowing here in the US, and hopefully they'll blow around the world. Thank you once again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Rob. As you rightly said, the winds of change are blowing, and it is happening with your country. And hopefully the same will happen right across all the countries of the world, especially in Africa, especially in Asia, where perhaps we experience the most oppressive regimes at this juncture. Structural racism is a reality, as you so beautifully put it. Structural casteism is so real as far as a country like India is concerned. There are rapes, there are murders that happen simply because they are born into a particular social group. And this is a reality of our country, India, and particularly the whole of South Asia. And such discriminations exist in every country where the Brothers of St. Gabriel work, in Asia, in Africa, in other parts of the world. And this is something that we want to change. And you rightly said how you immensely participate have been participating, I know you have been doing it since many years, in the Universal Review that happens every 4 years for every country in Geneva. It is possible that we are able to intervene in such a manner as you do, so that there are structural changes that happens. Individual changes are important, but structural changes in every society, in every country is as important or even more important. And it is important that we intervene as a global, as an international organization. So thank you, Robin, for that very insightful reflection that you had. Now we have all our speakers are here. Thank you for staying with us, especially to Robin, I must thank, especially because he got up so early in the morning to be present with us and to talk to us. Now we have another 10 minutes for questions or any reflections that the participants may have. So I invite questions. You can put your hand up by clicking the button, and then we will allow you to speak. So now it is to the whole platform of people who are present here from all over the world. Brother Joseph, you have put your hand up.
I have a question for Sir Mike Davis.
Yep.
Mike, I'm very much impressed by one of the sentences that you said in your deliberations. We'll learn through exchange of ideas from one another. Based on this element, I would like to pose a question to clarify concerning on the freedom of speech in Africa. Is it because of lack of conscientization on human rights among the citizens, or else you don't have a proper opposition to counter the ruling demonic government? Now, as we say that as at present during the pandemic, we are always looking forward that UN should interfere. But now similar situations, now we have got the highest body in the world, UNO. Why can't UN can interfere in this aspect and protect the nation of the less privileged by condemning through perpetrators through judiciary?
I think Mike had taken a break, but then any of the panelists could answer. Cedric, Reina, Rob. Cedric, would you like to come in? Because you have been very much working with the UN, so also Robin.
Yeah, in Fratelli Tuti, Pope Francis speaks about the UN, okay, and the fact that the UN today does not have teeth. We have Michel Blanchet, who has made statements on India, on the human rights situation in India, and there is Lawler, Mary Lawler, who has been, she's the rapporteur for UN for human rights.
Father, I
One
would
is
like
listening.
Father.
Yeah, hello.
I see.
Yes, Brother Joseph.
It is said that Pope Francis very well said in his encyclical Fratelli Tuti, emphasizing the peace and harmony among the nations, and
very
also
true.
ideal world of fraternity.
Yes.
Do we stand on this disoriented elements such as racism, okay, condemning the rapists, where is on the freedom of speech, but we only but we don't implement it.
But Joseph, maybe let Father Cedric answer, and then because
basically, Brother Joseph, I would go to the theme of this conference. What can we do? What can we, citizens of wherever we are, what can we brothers do? What is our congregation enjoining us to do? What is the Pope telling us? Let's have now a bottoms-up approach. Let's not rely on the rulers of this world. Let's now not rely on the hierarchies of our church. We have to have a bottoms-up approach, and this is what Pope is telling us very strongly in Fratelli Tuti, and even for the United Nations. How do we give it more teeth? Okay, is it because of money? Look how certain countries have tried to destroy the WHO in the wake of this pandemic, just because they want to market their own medicines, and this medicine is this, and COVID-19 does not exist, etc. So let's not depend anymore on the powerful, the Western interests, those who control the money bags of this world. But as good Brother Robinson was saying, let's start from a bottoms-up approach. Let's start with those who are sleeping on the street, with the excluded, the marginalized, the tribals. This is what Father Stan Swami, Brother Varghese, the other Varghese, Manda Patil has asked a question regarding the Babri Masjid and so on. And I think it's all very, very relevant. How do we ensure that we have more people's movement? We, as religious brothers, Jesuits, become part of people's movements. We should no longer seek maybe leadership roles, but let us be the leaven in the dough. Let us be the light in the world. Let us be the salt on the earth. This is nothing new. Jesus has told this over 2,000 years ago, but we have forgotten the message. Today's gospel, taking that whip, and it's about us. It's about us. It's not about those money lenders and the pigeon sellers of that time. We have missed the bus. We have not understood the gospel. We have commercialized our faith. We have commercialized, our institutions. All of us. I hold myself also as je m'accuse aussi, because some of you may be French. I accuse myself too. And I think we need to do something. Brother Joseph, Your question is very valid, and so is the other Varghese. I cannot pronounce your good name. I can pronounce Tekanati more easily than Manda Patil. Manda Patil. But thank you. Let others speak.
Okay, thank you. Robin, you have any insight? Yes.
Sure. I would agree with Brother Prakash that the UN as a whole doesn't have teeth, but there are mechanisms within the UN that we could use to advance our struggles. And I'll start with two ways. We have very strong ties on the ground to UN special rapporteurs. These are experts on particular subject matters. And it was the rapporteur on housing who came here on an official mission in 2009, Raquel Rolnick from Brazil, who made a very personal appeal to me and said, Rob, the UN won't give me any resources to take them down. But what I can do for you is lift up your voices. But I need your struggle. You need to share those struggles with me and take me into those communities where that struggle exists so that I could lift up your voices. And it was through that process in 2014, understanding how powerful these rapporteurs can be, that we brought the UN to Detroit, Michigan, with their own resources. Katerina de Albuquerque and Leilani Farhar, at the start of her mission, came to Detroit to understand why people are going without water in Detroit, right? The wealthiest country in the world, and people had no access to fresh drinking water. Yet the U.S. will tell you about all the potable water it delivers around the world. But within its own country, there's a denial of this resource to people living. And to have the UN come in and sort of rubber stamp what people were saying was very powerful for the people. So I think UN rapporteurs, and we continue that relationship with Leilani Farhar even after her mission is over, and the new rapporteur in housing, Balakrishnan Rajagopal, has promised us that he's going to focus on homelessness and evictions. And I think the other UN mechanism that we can use is the UN working groups, right? Right now, we're in the decade of people of African descent. So those issues of structural racism resonate within that working group, and we can use those working groups to promote our issues. I would agree as a whole, the UN is not a valuable institution because it has no teeth, but if we use it to sort of bump heads as we do with the Universal Periodic Review, we organize ourselves across the country to make our voices heard within this Universal Periodic Review. And I guarantee you today, the US will be challenged on structural racism, lack of access to water, lack of access to food, and to homelessness issues. So it's our voices being lifted up, but collectively bring our voices together and make ourselves heard from the ground up.
Can I just interject?
Please.
Brother Robinson, I do agree with you on the mechanisms. We have been part of the Universal Periodic Review. We have been part of working with the rapporteurs. I gave you the example of Mary Lawler and so on. And there is a lot of pressure that, yes, now both, you look at Joe Biden and what Kamala Harris has spoken about India. So I've just finished an article, what you welcome climate for change. Welcome climate for change. And I began with what Fan Jones said at the CNN. He broke down. He cried. He said, finally, I can tell my children we have some character in the nation. And both Joe Biden and both Kamala Harris have spoken very strongly about what is happening in India today. So while they'll be very friendly with the Indian people, I don't think our regime in India likes them very much. But the point is, are they listening? Will they get change? So I'm saying is, while we need to use these mechanisms, we also have to have people's movements, accompany people in their struggle for a more just and humane society. Black lives matter there, and Adivasi lives and Dalit lives and women's lives matter in India.
Thank you, Cedric. I think these are very important insights. As an organization, the Brothers of St. Gabriel are present in 32 to 33 countries, especially in the southern continent, the southern part of the global south. And I think it is important that we are able to take stories of small people, small stories and small struggles, small problems of small people, to these platforms that exist at the national level. Yes, there are institutions that still exist that protect rights of children, rights of women, human rights, rights of the Dalits, rights of the tribals. I think it is important that we make our stories, the stories of these people heard. So also at the global level. That is, I think, to make our presence, our global presence really impactful. This is something I think we need to enter into, and this is a new opportunity that the technology offers us, the structures, global structures, national structures that offer us. So with that, we conclude this webinar. I very specially want to thank each of you who have been present here. We had at one point of time around 175 people on the Zoom and around 20 or so on the Facebook. I want to thank Brother John Callereca, the Superior General, and the whole council. His whole team was present throughout this meeting. I want to thank the provincials who are present here. I want to thank the provincial province leaderships that were present here, and very, very especially each of you speakers, Cedric, Mike, Raina, Robin, who gave us great insights into understanding the context in our countries. And tomorrow we shall come back at the same time at 2 p.m. Indian time, the Indian Standard Time. What to look for, seek for, search for responses that we need to find. And the pandemic is a grave threat to humanity. Yes, it has caused great suffering, but this is an opportunity to create new ways of being, new ways of living, and new ways of becoming prophetic people for our times. So this is what we shall be precisely seeking tomorrow, and we have some wonderful speakers. I especially I saw Brother Jean-Friand there, I saw Brother Guy Blaise, people, Guy is in Canada, and people who got up very early with Robin and others to be present at this meeting. So thank you very much. Thanks to each of you for your presence. We shall be sharing these videos, these talks later on, as we shall share it with, and then those links that came from Mike, the PowerPoint that came from Reina, all these we shall be sharing with all the participants and others. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brother John, Brother Pratap, Brother Jean-Paul, Brother James, and all the others for being present with us over there. Brother Mike. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, and all the best. See you at the same time tomorrow. That is, we meet at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.